delighted to see so many people here, really lovely. Thank you all for coming to support our interfaith evening. And it's a great pleasure for me to introduce to you our speaker. I'm going to try very hard to pronounce these things. I know I'm going to get it wrong, but she will correct me, I'm sure. Chandani, Natalia, Rashani from the Roma community. So let's give her a warm welcome. And the talk this evening is the traditional beliefs and magic of the Roma. And I have a small biography from her. Chandani is an elder and a Giovanni Sastimescri, forgive me.
Giovanni Sastimescri, Travengri.
That's it. Like that.
Very 10 out of 10 for effort.
Magic worker, healer and herbalist of the Roma people. She was born in a travelling Roma community. Her family was Roma and has lived in 10 countries in Europe. And she is a native speaker of the Romani language. Her maternal family has retained all of the old Indian spiritual and magical beliefs and practices of the Roma. And Chandani comes from a lineage of that dates back many centuries. She is also a well-known community leader and activist for Roma immigrants in the UK and strongly is involved in work to document and preserve the linguistic and cultural heritage as well as the history of the Roma, and is well known in Roma communities across Europe as an expert on the history, traditions and language as well as a Chandani. So there will be questions, there will be lots of opportunities to talk, and feel free to ask if you want something clarified, because Natalia, as I know her, says she prefers you to interject when a thought comes to you.
Yeah, please do, because very often I give this talk as the second of a pair, where the first one in the pair is about our history, how we came to leave India and come to Europe, and a sort of intro to our culture. And the second talk, which is this one, is about the magical and the healing traditions. So I'll try to sort of backtrack and put in little bits of history where it's necessary that you can understand what I'm going on about. But if anything doesn't make sense, please do interrupt me and say, Chandani or Natalia, I answer to both. Please explain that. I'm very happy to do that. La chirata tu venges a. Le caravan Chandani Natalia. Tu venges caracrava trostale romai tradizi. I'll switch back to English, don't worry. I was just saying hello, telling you my name in the Romani language and saying that I'm going to talk with you about Romani traditions. The talk is in English, don't worry. But I will do, I have included a couple of paramisia, which are like parables of our beliefs. They're very, very short, and I will do those in Romani and then translate them for you, just so you get to hear a little bit of our lovely language. So, for any of you who don't know, the Roma people came from northern India. You could probably guess it looking at me. We're basically a mixture of Punjabi and Rajasthani nomads who were kicked out of India for various reasons. There's some debate among historians about why we got kicked out of India, but every single Roma tribe that I've spoken to has an origin story, which is a variant on the idea that we offended the ruling castes of India by not wanting to submit to their caste system and their rule, because we're very low caste. And because we had skills with magic, and we're known to be a bit stroppy and we stand up for ourselves, they kicked us out. And there's a story pretty much to that effect in every tribe. So I think we have to accept that that is indeed what happened. And we left India in several migrations. The first was round about 1,000 years ago, and the last was probably only about 500 or 600 years ago. And made our way overland through what's now Iran, Armenia, what's now Turkey, Greece, and initially we all settled down in the Balkans, Romania, Greece, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia as it was. And then we made a second diaspora in the late Middle Ages where we spread out all over Europe. So you'll now find Roma people everywhere from British Isles right the way down to Turkey. And in fact, amazingly, there is a tribe of Roma in Kazakhstan who speak almost exactly the same dialect of the Romani language that I do, because they're West European Roma who did the grand circle and almost ended up back home. I was really amazed to discover that a few years ago, but I have a friend who is a Kazakh Rom, and as soon as we got talking, he speaks the same dialect as me. It turns out when we compare notes about our tribes, that his tribe were part of essentially the same tribe I come from, until just a couple of hundred years ago, we got as far as Germany, and then we parted ways. My family stayed in Central Europe and eventually came to Britain. His sub-tribe went around in a great big circle through Russia and ended up in Kazakhstan. So we move around a lot. And because of our origins, we are very Indian in our blood, our language, our culture, and especially our religious and magical beliefs. The Romani language is actually related enough to Punjabi that I can speak to Punjabi friends if I don't speak too fast, and they don't speak too fast. Which is really quite a nice demonstration of where we came from. We have our own flag, just while I'm talking about our origins. And if any of you are familiar with the Indian flag, you'll see that this is kind of a shout out to the Indian flag to show our Indian origins. We have the blue and the green is the sky and the earth, reflecting our nomadic history and our nature-based spirituality. And the red wheel can be seen either as a caravan wheel to shout out to our nomadic history, but it can also be seen as the Ashoka Chakra that's present in the Indian flag as a shout out to our Indian heritage. I'll start my little history section with a translation of an article which I found when I was doing some historical research, and I translated from medieval Italian. It was written by a guy called Cesare Vecellio in 1590, when he met some of the first Roma to settle on the Italian peninsula. And I've actually enlarged the woodcut from Vecellio's book. I'll pass that round, if any, because it is rather a nice picture. And that is a high status Roma woman from the 1590s. And you'll see there's actually quite a significant similarity of her dress to how I'm dressed. I don't have the elaborate headdress that they had back then. In my generation, it's reduced to a simple headscarf, which I'm not wearing today because I'm rebellious. But it's a rather nice indication how little our style of dress has actually changed even since we left India. And this is what Vecellio had to say about the Roma that he met in 1590. There's a certain group of people who stop for 3 days in one place and 3 in another and have no permanent home. They say they're Christians, but they have differences from our Catholic faith. Their lord and their nobles smear their faces and their bodies with ground sandalwood and other precious scents. And that's a reference to the fact we have a very strong cultural tradition of cleanliness, which I will talk about later. They have a lord, who they call the King of Calicut, who worships the devil as an accurately carved and painted likeness, saying that his God-given task was to do justice, if indeed they believe in God at all now. This king has some Brahmins or priests who are much respected. The clothing of the gypsy woman shown above has her wearing on her head a coronet made from light wood, covered with canvas bands many feet long. They wear shirts worked in silk, of many colours and fine decoration, with long tails reaching down to their feet, which have large and finely embroidered and worked sleeves. She ties a cloth mantle over one shoulder so that it goes under her other arm, and it's so long that it reaches almost to her feet. Her hair falls from her head over her shoulders, and perhaps with the baby held in a kind of band tied around her neck, they go wandering. Now, poor Mr. Vecellio did get very confused about our religion there. First of all, he says that he thinks that we say we're Christians. That's true, because in medieval Europe, when we admitted we weren't Christians, we were executed. So we had to pretend to be Christians. He rather got confused about the dark deity figure. The deity figure is nothing to do with the devil, who doesn't even exist in our belief system. After all, the devil is an Abrahamic character. However, we do have a principal deity, and I'll talk more about her in a minute, called Palisada Devi, who is a direct equivalent of Durga in the Hindu pantheon. And, of course, she is depicted with dark skin. The poor Mr. Vecellio, looking from his medieval Christian point of view, got a bit confused and thought that this dark-skinned idol was the devil. And unfortunately, this kind of misconception has plagued us for centuries. So we get all of the horrible stereotypes saying that Roma are devil worshippers, antichrists, dirty, thieves, stupid, lazy, blah, blah, blah. None of it is even remotely true, but unfortunately it's simple xenophobia. We're still fighting against that even now. Of course, medieval Europe was not the most tolerant place to anybody who wasn't Christian. And more to the point, in most of medieval Europe, with the exception of Spain and Portugal, which already had dark people in the shape of the Moors, we were the first non-white people they'd seen. So they suddenly were presented with this bunch of people who were not white, dressed weirdly, like me, spoke a language that the Europeans couldn't understand, had very different ideas about religion, practiced magic, and worst of all, we didn't stay in one place, we moved around, which in feudal Europe was not the thing to do. And unfortunately, this kicked off a lot of very bad persecution and xenophobia, which we've been stuck with ever since. Therefore, a lot of our ancestors pretended to be Christian so that they didn't get executed. You'll see in history books that sometimes leaders of the wandering Roma tribes called themselves princes of Little Egypt, and they even claimed to be Christian pilgrims and penitents sometimes, just simply for their own protection. The Little Egypt thing is where words like gypsy come from, because the Europeans mistakenly believed that we came from Egypt, not India. But the reason for that, actually, a little bit of interesting history, and then I'll get off history and on to religion, I do promise. When we first reached what was then the Byzantine Empire, what's now sort of Western Turkey, the first groups of Roma there settled outside a city called Methoni, which is now Modon in Greece. And it so happened that also living at Modon were a group of people who really were Egyptian. And they were called the Atingani, which in medieval Greek means not to be touched. They followed a Manichaean faith, and their faith system held that they alone were pure. The mainstream Christians and everybody else were impure, and therefore the Atingani were not to be touched by non-members of their sect. Unfortunately, because they were a bunch of Egyptians, they were quite dark, they had exotic ways compared with the Europeans, and they lived in the same place as the first Roma settlers. So the Byzantines confused the two of us, and you'll see in history books, they actually often refer to Roma as Atingani, and that's just not true. So this has caused a lot of confusion in history books, and it's the origin of all of the exonyms, the names used for us by outsiders. Gypsy is a distortion of the English word Egyptian. Gitan, in French, is a distortion of the word Égyptien. Tsigan, how we're called in Romanian, for example, is a distortion of Athingani. Gyftos, which is one of the two ways we're called in Greek, is a distortion of Aegyptos, Egyptian. The other way we're called in Greek is Athingani. And so we've had these centuries of confusion that have led to a lot of inapplicable names being put on us, and complete confusion between us and a bunch of Egyptians, who still exist, incidentally. They're called nowadays Dari and Ashkali, and they live in Eastern Europe, but they're not Roma. So anyway, we came under a lot of pressure because we followed a non-Christian belief system and we stuck out like a sore thumb in medieval Europe. And some very nasty persecution kicked off. There were genocides, imprisonment in Romania and Bulgaria, and that area we were enslaved for 500 years. In what's now Germany, Czech Republic, Slovakia, we were enslaved. We were subjected to witch hunts all over Europe, especially as a lot of our women made their living by doing healing, which of course many of us are very good at, doing prognostics, fortune telling, that sort of thing, which of course, unfortunately, to a medieval Christian mindset, very easily looks like devil worship or witchcraft. And so there's a lot of very, very nasty persecution. And what happened, to cut a long story short, is that particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, a lot of the Roma were forced to convert to Christianity to save their lives, because otherwise they were literally executed. Very often they practiced a kind of dual allegiance where they paid lip service to Christianity, but underneath they kept the old ways. Even nowadays, I know a lot of Roma who do that. Even though they sincerely believe in Jesus Christ and the Christian beliefs now as well, but they mix them with the old beliefs. That's very, very common. I mean, you can go to, let's say, the Czech Republic or Slovakia, which are the centre of the persecution against us by the Catholic Church in the 16th, 17th century, where you'll find the most Christianised Roma. And still, you'll find all of them, if you actually speak to them, they believe in spirits, we call them. They believe in destiny, the power of the cards to tell the future, the power of magic to alter the future, to heal people. Very often they believe in reincarnation, rather than the idea that you die and then spend eternity with God. And another lovely little touch is that one of their favourite imprecations, where a British person would say, "Oh my God," let's say, the Roma usually shout out "Dilali," which means "oh gods," plural. Even the very, very Christian Roma shout out "Dilali" when they're stressed out. And that's a very, very obvious survival of polytheistic belief. So the old beliefs are always there, even if they're semi-buried under Christianity. Or in the southeast of the diaspora, there's a significant number of Muslim Roma in what used to be the Ottoman Empire. I should say, in fairness to the Muslims, they never did anything nasty to us, the way that certain Christian churches did. The reason that a lot of Roma converted to Islam was that the Ottoman authorities gave a tax break to anybody who adopted Islam. Basically, you had to pay an infidel tax if you lived in the Ottoman Empire but weren't Muslim. And if you converted, you were exempted from this tax. So, of course, a lot of the Roma converted. And in the Muslim part of the diaspora, you do find that the old traditions generally survive really quite well mixed with Islam. So you'll hear very, very often that Muslim Roma will go to mosque and pray to Allah, but they will also leave offerings to Saibia, who is the Romani goddess of fortune and destiny. And they really do mix the traditions a lot. Okay, so I'll leave the history lesson aside now and get on with the religion part. So as I said, the Paignton Romengo, as we say, the old faith of the Roma, it's a mixture of Hinduism and even older Indian animism, paganism. That kind of mixing of Hindu and pre-Hindu beliefs is also found in India among a lot of the nomadic Indian tribes who are our closest relatives. I don't know if any of you have ever met any of the Kalbelia gypsies in Rajasthan, but if you put a typical Kalbelia woman next to me, she'll look like my sister. You know, we look very, very similar because they are very closely related to us, and they're one of the many tribes that has very similar beliefs, mixing elements of Hinduism and elements of very old Indian animism. The reason we don't follow standard Hinduism is, of course, that for centuries we had no one who was literate because of the pressures of nomadic life, leaving India, pushing on across the Middle East and ending up in Europe. So we had no scriptures. So all of our beliefs and our language and our history and our stories and our songs have all come down by word of mouth only. And one of the roles of a Tohani like me is as a rememberer. I write things down because I'm literate, but I was taught by my grandmother all sorts of memorization tricks for remembering stories, facts, history, without having to write them down. We've actually done very well, I think, to retain all of that information through the best part of 1,000 years of illiteracy. I'll run through some of our main deities. A lot of our deities are exactly the same as Hindu ones, and some of them are not. Incidentally, I'll say while I'm at this point in the talk that any of you who are familiar with Hinduism will probably recall that Hindu deities are very often portrayed with light skin and rather European looks. And the reason for that is that Indian society is heavily permeated by caste prejudice, and the higher castes tend to have lighter skin and slightly more European features than other Indians. We reject that. We take great pride in being dark, and we like to portray our deities as dark, which is how, of course, the original Indian deities would have been before the incoming Aryans, who were of Persian origin and much lighter than the Indians, brought their ideas with them. So the depictions of the deities that I've chosen, I've tried to choose ones who are depicted in a traditionally dark way rather than looking European. The first three deities that we share with Hinduism is the Trimurti. Again, I'll pass these flashcards round because it's quite a big room. The Trimurti it's like the Holy Trinity of Hinduism. And in mainstream Hinduism, that's Brahma, who is the creator, Vishnu, who is the preserver of the universe, and Shiva, who is the destroyer and the lord of the cosmic dance. And we have exactly the same three primary gods. The names have been slightly distorted in our language. We say Brahma rather than Brahma, Vishnu rather than Vishnu, and Shiva is Shiva. But they're exactly the same as in mainstream Hinduism. In Hindu belief, Lord Shiva and some of the other deities carry a trident. And the word in Sanskrit for a trident is Trishula. In Romani, the word for a trident is Trushul. Same word. And we have slightly extended the meaning of Trushul, so it also includes the Christian cross for those Roma who are Christian, because Lord Shiva has the trident as his symbol of authority in his religion. And so when Roma began to adopt Christianity, they used the same word to refer to the cross of Jesus. It's still got three prongs. It does make sense. This is Vishnu, or Vishnu as we call him. He is the deity who holds up the heavens and maintains the universe that Shiva has created. There's a nice little tale in our belief system where we refer to rain as Ididliskorat, which means the blood of God. And that might seem a bit strange to somebody who's come from a Christian background. But because Vishnu is the guy who maintains the universe, keeps the crops growing, keeps everything ticking over nicely, and he holds up the skies as well, the idea is when it rains, Lord Vishnu is sacrificing his own blood to maintain his children. I think that's rather nice. This is Lord Shiva. For any of you who are familiar with Hindu teaching will recognise. He's got the trident, and he's got it's a bit dark, but he is the lord of the cosmic dance, the guy who destroys things that need destroying, kicks demons, and generally he's a big boss god. I'll tell you an interesting fact about Shiva in Romani belief, at the risk of being censored, because it's mildly rude. In Romani, there is a way of making an extremely solemn oath, and we say which means, and then say the oath, which means I eat the willy of God, so that blah blah blah. And that has confused outsiders for centuries that we say that. And unfortunately, at least a couple of Christian writers that I'm familiar with have claimed that that's evidence of ritual cannibalism in our past, which it really isn't. What it actually is a reference to kissing the Shiva Lingam. Any of you who are familiar with Hinduism will know that the Shiva Lingam, which is I don't think there is a lingam in my picture of Shiva, but usually when Lord Shiva is depicted, you see a somewhat phallic-looking carved stone beside him, which is called the Shiva Lingam in Sanskrit, and it represents Lord Shiva's male energy. And so by saying, I eat God's willy, so that, what it actually is referring to is kissing the Shiva Lingam to make a solemn vow in the name of Lord Shiva's male energy. It's nothing to do with cannibalism at all, but it really does confuse outsiders. Our next deity is this guy. We call him Yandra. In mainstream Hinduism, he's called Indra. And he's actually not very important in present-day Hinduism. But in earlier Hinduism, at the date that my ancestors left India, he was one of the boss gods. And his role is, he's associated with storms and rivers, which is why he's riding a heavenly charger through a storm cloud in the picture. But he also has a role of fighting and destroying demons, destroying evil. He's a protector. So he's very important to us. Our next deity, this lady is my patron goddess. This is Kalisara Devi, which literally means dark Sara, the goddess. In mainstream Hinduism, she's called Durga. And the reason that we call her by a different name is that in northern India, back in the day when our ancestors left, she had an alternative name of Sharika. And in fact, if you go to Kashmir, she's still called Sharika in Kashmir. So my ancestors distorted the name Sharika to Sara. And Kali just means dark, and Devi means goddess. So she's dark Sara, the goddess. And she is our main mother deity. She is seen as the sacred mother of the Roma people, our protector, our earth goddess. She is one of the most important deities that we pray to. So she's very much a protectress too. Associated with her, we have Kali. Again, she's called Kali in mainstream Hinduism as well. She is the angry demon zapping avatar of Kalisara Devi. Again, we very often invoke her to fight against evil. She's also the goddess of time and death. She's not horrible and sinister, as you might think from being a goddess of death. She has a very important purpose to take away things that have outlived their time or are outworn and need to be replaced and made new again. She also has a strong association with the death of the ego. So if you want to achieve enlightenment, you need to leave your ego behind. And that's also Kali's job. So again, she's absolutely the same in our tradition as in mainstream Hinduism. That's a rather nice depiction. If anyone gets confused about which deity is which on the flashcards, please do interrupt me and I'll tell you. This lady, this is one of the ones that not every tribe of Roma remembers. She's called Lakshmi, and again, we share her exactly with mainstream Hinduism. She is the goddess of wealth and prosperity. And during the last few years, with COVID and Brexit and all the other economic chaos going on around us, I've many times done puja to her, invocation, praying to her to please get me some more work. And it's worked every time. So I'm very grateful to her. She's one of my favourite deities. This is Saraswati. Again, she's exactly the same in the Roma tradition as in mainstream Hinduism. She's the goddess of wisdom and of music and art and creativity. So, of course, music is very important in our traditions. Most of us are musicians, myself included, and she is our patron goddess for the musicians. We've now got a few other deities who don't quite overlap with mainstream Hinduism, but are closely related. They're sort of survivals of very early Hinduism. We have Kam, who is the sun god. He's called Surya in mainstream Hinduism. He's sort of another avatar of Brahma, if you like. He is a sort of father god character, and he will pop up in some of the Paramisya or parables that I'll tell you in a minute. We have a moon god, Chun, who in mainstream Hinduism is Chandra. My name Chandani, incidentally, is related to that. Chandani means moonlight. The moon is a very important deity in our traditions, and again, I will talk more about him later in the talk. He's a him, he's not a her in our tradition, same as in mainstream Hinduism, the moon is male. We have a deity of fire, who we call Yag, and she's a goddess. Her name is clearly related to Agni, who is the standard Hindu god of fire, but she's changed gender. We've got one other gender-changed deity. The deity of wind in mainstream Hinduism is called Pavana, and in Romani she becomes a goddess, and she's called Paval. Very similar word, but her gender has flipped. The reason for the gender flip is simply linguistic. There's not actually any big religious reason for the gender flip. What happened is that the Sanskrit language has masculine, feminine, and neutral words, and words like Agni, fire, and Pavana, wind, were neutral in Sanskrit. But when the modern Indian languages evolved from Sanskrit, languages like Hindi, Punjabi, Romani, they lost the neutral category, and neutral words became feminine. So our word for fire, Yag, is feminine. Our word for wind, Paval, is feminine. It's not some big religious thing, it's simply linguistic. We've also got some gods and elementals who have got nothing at all to do with mainstream Hinduism and are unique to us. We've got a sky god who's called either Thanopre or Ravnos, depending on which tribe you come from. He's closely related with Yandra, the demon killer, and with the Trimurti, the three boss gods, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. We also have an earth goddess called Puv, and she is closely associated with the mother goddess Kalisara Devi. Rather uniquely, we have a goddess of fog called Magla. Now, of course, mainstream Hinduism doesn't have a goddess of fog because fog isn't really a big deal in India. However, when a bunch of Indian nomads come to cold, wet Europe, they suddenly discover that fog is actually quite problematical sometimes. And so we made a goddess of fog called Magla, who of course isn't always particularly benign, but the idea is if you do puja to her, pray to her, and nice to her, you're less likely to get lost in the fog. In the same way, actually, our wind goddess, Babal, is not always benign. She can be trouble, but if you propitiate her with prayers and offerings, then you'll get better weather when you're travelling, and things will be nicer for you. Wind is obviously quite a hazard to nomadic people. I should say, incidentally, on the subject of being nomadic or not, nowadays 95% of Roma are not nomadic. There's only a very small number of us remain nomadic. Some families have been settled for centuries, others, like myself, started out travelling, but now I live in a house. It's just the way things changed. being nomadic has never been a prerequisite or even an important part of the Roma identity. We were nomadic, of course, until relatively recent times, but it's not seen as being our identity. We're still just as much Roma if we live in a house. We also have a whole lot of elementals. We've got water spirits called the Nivash and the Nivashia. The Nivash is male and the Nivashia are his daughters. Again, they're not always benign, of course, because water can be helpful or it can be dangerous. So the water spirits are used quite a lot in our healing traditions, which I'll talk about later, but you also don't want to make them angry. We have a bunch of earth spirits called the Pupuche. Again, they're kind of like pixies in Western English tradition. They are not always nice, they can be awkward. We also have Vishniduka, who are forest spirits, who are, as long as you're respectful to them, they're very nice actually. I love the Vishniduka. We have Puvyaki Manushnia, who are very closely corresponding to fairies or fae in Western traditions. Again, they can be quite mischievous. They're not actually evil, but they can be quite irritating if they want to be. We basically have the idea that everything has a spirit. So we believe in spirits of place. We call them Taningaduka. In Western tradition, they're often referred to as Genia Locorum, the spirits of the place. And we also have a very strong concept of destiny or predestination, that certain events in life are, if not absolutely predestined, then at least very likely. And so we believe in destiny, fortune telling, fate. A lot of the Western Roma call, like the group I come from, call the deity of fate Kishmet, which is a borrowing from Turkish. In what used to be Yugoslavia, she's a goddess, not a god, and she's called Sabia, but she has the same role. And associated with Kishmet, we have a specific deity of fortune telling, who you invoke when you're doing fortune telling or prognostic magic. And in my tradition, he's known as Otukeripenskoduch, which is literally the prognostic spirit. He's obviously closely associated with Kishmet because his job is fate. That was probably quite a heavy section, so I'm going to now give you a couple of paramisia or parables, give you an idea about how Romani belief thinks. It is kind of whimsical, I think, if you're coming from a European background. And I'm going to do the first two of these in Romani and then translate them for you. The first one is called I Paramisia Kamnesti Tre Chunesti, which means the story of the sun and the moon. Puti puti mili bershapole, o kam tau chun ledui, Romadi e shukar monushnien adre o tanopre. E kamneski romni sasla sonakani bala, tai chunesti romni sasla ropene bala. Te romni aledui biandi e puti chave. Sonakani cerchene e kamneski familia, ta ropene cerchene e chunesti familia. Yek cheras poleda, o tanopre aveas celis perdo cerchenensa, ta sos lent kerena varso. O kam delias pescodi, kai selen ledui tichona pengrichave, ta tukni penisa o chun penias yakutnes. O kam chaulias sopre o sonakane cerchenesor, numa pescri romni odia tragedia veas, kai mulias lagisata tukni penisa. Cana vodiclias aceles, o chun cindias pescros alechipen, ta nachalias pescrichaven. O kam zoralias roslias, ta sariciareski rodelo chun perdal utan pre. Ta akisoski irati palarela odives, ta chun avela bardet inter kurkeski. And what that means is many millennia ago, Kam, the sun god, and Chun, the moon god, each of them married beautiful celestial beings. Kam's wife had golden hair and Chun's wife had silver hair. Each wife bore many children. Golden stars were Kam's family and silver stars were Chun's family. After a while, the heavens became very crowded with stars and something had to be done. Chum had the idea that they should each eat their children. And with sadness, Chun agreed. Chum ate up all the golden stars, but his wife was so horrified that she died of shame and grief. Seeing this, Chun broke his oath and did not eat his children. Chum became enraged, and for the rest of eternity he chases Chun around the heavens. This is why night follows day, and why Chun, moon, grows bigger and smaller from week to week. And of course it also explains why there aren't any gold stars in the sky, they're all silver, because Chum ate up all the gold ones. I should say at this point that in the same way that the cross is the icon of Christian belief, and the crescent is the icon of Muslim belief, the icons of Romani traditional belief are the sun, the moon, and the stars. Hence the story. The second one, which is shorter, is called I Paramisi e Eftidevlengi, which means the parable of the seven deities. And it goes like this. Puti puti pershapone, otan pretai puve cheri pashile yakekasa, the beshke ketinesa ron taroni. Saslen panch tanore, dui chave, Ocham ta Chun, ta Trinchaya, I Baval, I Magla, ta Yag. Numa, sarkene chabe chingarenes pen, ta cane pingri puri provirtie te pandenelen, kaiti ricarenelen conye, prostis baravelias o chingaipen. Polnes, puri de pen, te chinena avre pingri familia. Doleske, sore mursha, o tanapre, Ocham, ta Chun, jelie dur prono, ta muklie, Sor e Jubiet, I Puf, I Baval, I Magla, ta Yag, Ketenia Telal. And what that means is, many, many years ago, the heavens and the earth were close together and they lived together as a married couple. They had 5 children, 2 male, the sun and the moon, and 3 female, wind, fog and fire. But the children were forever squabbling and fighting. And when the parents tried to confine them and calm them down, the fighting just got worse. In the end, the parents decided to split up the family. So the males, heaven, sun and moon, were sent way up above, leaving the females, earth, wind, fog and fire, together down below. And the beauty of that little story is that, as I said just now, in Romani is a 2-gender language, so it's kind of like French, if any of you know French. Everything is either masculine or feminine. And in our language, sun and moon and heaven are masculine words, and earth, wind, fire and fog are feminine words, so it matches. We love little stories like that sort of fit with something in our language. I've got one more parable for you, which is longer, so I'll do it just in English. So I don't suppose anybody here speaks Romani, although it's a lovely language. No, I hope you enjoy listening to it. This is called The First People, and it's our origin story, sort of our equivalent of Adam and Eve. Many thousands of years ago, when the world was newly created, the great God felt lonely, and he decided to create the first people to live on his new world. He created these people out of clay and baked them in his fire. The first time, God made 1 man and 1 woman out of clay, put them in the fire, and then went away to get on with some other work that he needed to do. Many hours later, he suddenly remembered the people in the fire, came back and took them out. He saw that they had become very, very dark and black, and they became the first Africans. The second time, once again God made 1 man and 1 woman out of clay, put them in the fire. This time he was worried that they'd be overcooked again, and so he took them out very, very early from the fire, before they were even properly baked. And these people were completely white, and they became the first Gaji, non-Roma Europeans. And finally, God, you can see where this is going, can't you? Finally, God made a 3rd man and woman out of clay and put them in his fire. This time he got it just right. When they came out of the fire, they had a lovely golden brown colour. They became the first Roma, and God was happy with them. I'm going to skip a few bits of the talk because I'm conscious of time. I'll talk very, very briefly about ghosts and vampires, we have two different sorts of revenants in our belief. One is a thing called a mulo, which is very, very similar to the classic East European vampire, and is actually the source of the East European vampire myth. The classic East European vampire is a mix of old European beliefs about undead mixed with Romani belief, because of course we settled in Eastern Europe first. A mullo is somebody who has got unfinished business. Maybe he's a murder victim, or he was terribly wronged in his life, or the death rituals weren't done properly, so he's got a score to settle with somebody. And so they rise from the grave and come back. The mullo, the Romani vampire, though, doesn't suck blood. They suck instead spiritual energy. So anybody that a mullo latches onto becomes sick or crazy, may die. If you have problems with the mullo, you need to destroy it with magic or with garlic, which is a panacea in our herbalism. Of course, that was borrowed into the European vampire legend. And the link with the blood thing in European vampire stories is that a mullo, or Romani vampire, if you do manage to destroy it, it will explode in a cloud of blood, even though it doesn't suck blood. The reason for that is that, I mentioned earlier, we have strong beliefs about ritual purity and ritual hygiene, and for us, blood is seen as ultimately unclean. So something like an undead would explode into blood because it's fundamentally everything that's evil and horrible. We have another type of ghost, which is the classic immaterial ghost. We call them babalengo, which literally means a creature of air. That's the classic sort of intangible type of ghost, who may be perfectly nice, incidentally. They're not necessarily evil at all. Okay, I'm going to skip a couple of other bits because of time. I've got a little prayer here, which again I'm going to read in the Romani. It's very short, and it's very, very Hindu. This is called the Prayer of Life, and it goes: "Wachtarati Devi concertia sasumna, tu kimangava tera kesa terichavia, the pereseman side romiste, the sakanate cheseman mansar. The polnes canaveli ior canamishum timerava, the tarteseman pertal meripen, conipenisa fabit tukipenister, talitianeseman raklesa gre mironefujipen, actiavel." Which translates as: "Blessed Goddess, who created the world, I pray to you to protect your daughter, to travel with me on the road, and to always remain with me. And at the end, when the time comes for me to die, to guide me through death, in peace and without pain, and then to bring me safely to my next life. So may it be." Of course, there's the reference to reincarnation, which is very much one of our beliefs. I'm going to skip on and start talking about magical practices now. When I was introduced as being Chavahani, Sastameskri, and Ravengri. Those roles usually, but not always, go together. Very often it's one person who carries those roles in a clan. Chavahani means a magic worker, Sastameskri means a healer, and Ravengri means a herbalist. So they're very closely related roles, and very often it is one person who carries them. Interesting little fact is that in the old nomadic Roma clans, the kralis, or clan leader, who's always a man, has the ultimate say-so, normally, in anything. However, there is one person in the clan who can overrule him, and that's the Chandani. And the reason is that anything that may affect the health of anybody in the clan, if the clan leader makes what the Torbay thinks is a bad decision, she can overrule him. So our culture is not as patriarchal as people often think it is. Our herbalism is closely derived from Ayurveda, not surprisingly since we came from India, but we've added to it a variety of plants that we discovered in Europe that are not known in India. So we've got our own unique tradition of herbalism. We have a tendency to divide illnesses into two different categories. We call them Romani Filipina, which are Roma illnesses, and Gashkani Filipina, which is non-Roma illnesses. And okay, it's pretty slightly unfair of us to do this, but it's obviously this is from a pre-scientific people who are just trying to empirically work out how to keep their clan healthy. The idea is that Romani Filipina are things that we are naturally susceptible to. So heart disease, for example, which is something that we have a lot of problems with, like a lot of Indian peoples, they're considered to be Romani. Whereas, for example, sexual diseases are considered to be Gachkani, because if we follow our rather strict laws of morality, you're not likely to get anything. Obviously, it's not as simple as that. We know that now, but that's the way it's laid out in our traditions. That there are certain types of diseases that good, honourable, well-behaved Roma just shouldn't get. Of course, not all Roma are honourable or well-behaved. Some illnesses we do recognise are caused by very mundane things like poor diet, an imbalance in the diet, something. But we also have the view that some problems, particularly psychological ones, are of spiritual origin, caused by dukkha, spirits. We use aura magic a great deal in our traditions. I suspect probably quite a few of you have come across the use of aura in healing. Everybody has an aura, and most people can actually learn to see them. One of the things I do sometimes is I teach people aura magic, and the majority of people can learn to see them. The aura is a sort of spiritual energy field that surrounds the body and the head, and you can deduce from it the person's mood, their state of health, their character, a lot of other useful stuff about them. We use this a great deal in our healing, not only to look at the aura so you can see, this person's got a real attitude problem, I'm going to keep away from them, or this person's heartbroken and needs some healing, or this person's got a dark shadow on their lung, oh dear, we better send them to the Gaiji doctors because that could be lung cancer. So we use that kind of diagnostic use of aura, but we also manipulate the aura as part of our magical healing. So what I would do if I'm doing aura healing on someone is I will put my hands not directly on their body normally, but at the boundary between the inner and outer aura, which is usually about 4 or 5 centimeters from the body, and I will manipulate the energy field of the body. I don't know if time will allow at the end. I'm more than happy to actually demonstrate if anyone's up for it. Usually I do get asked to do that. It's quite effective. It's very good for things like blocking pain, blocking nausea. I mean, it's very, very good as complementary therapy for people going through chemo, for example, because I can block the nausea and pain with chemo. I can normally block headaches and migraines, and promote healing. Obviously, I can't do miracles, but it is actually quite effective. I'll just throw in another little anecdote while I'm on the subject of auras. You'll see in a lot of books about us mention of what people call the gypsy stare. And a lot of Gaji writers have said that Roma have a habit of staring at people in a very hostile way. Oh, that's really when I read about that many years ago, I thought that's really unfair. We're actually quite nice people if you treat us reasonably. If you're not rampantly racist against us, we're actually really nice. We throw good parties. We're warm-hearted. Why do they say we've got this horrible stare? And then when I thought about it, I realised that those of us who follow the old ways are brought up to, whenever you meet someone for the first time, you read their aura to see what they're going to be like. Is this person going to be warm-hearted and nice to me, or are they going to be horrible and mean? And when you're reading someone's aura, the best way to do it is, because you're reading with your third eye, not with your mundane eyes. And so the way we do it is we kind of stare at the person, but focusing on a point behind their head, so that you're not really focusing too much on what your eyes see, but pointing your third eye at the person. And because most Roma have very dark, very deep set eyes, like me, if someone doing that sort of aura aiming look at someone, it can look kind of weird. I tried it in a mirror and it did look scary. So that's the origin of the gypsy stare. We're not actually hostile, we're just reading our aura to see if we're going to be nice or not. It's a very basic idea in our beliefs that words have power. And this is used by official magic workers like me, but it's also used in very simple invocations that anybody can do. Just going to skip a few bits. Okay, so here is a very, very old traditional invocation for easing a toothache. And this doesn't, if you can't get hold of a healer, you can do this one yourself. You recite these words and you take a bunch of straw and you visualize putting the pain from your mouth into the straw, and then you chuck it in the water and you ask the water spirits to take away the pain. And the rhyme that you recite goes, O dukadre miradanga, ma paris mande chingar, akana javre, sakana achkere, sarpuschiva vipenyeske, nekana navuduk pale. It rhymes. In English that means, spirit or pain in my teeth, stop bugging me. Right now, go away, stay at your home. As I cast the straw into the water, may the duk of the pain or the spirit never come back. That's very, very simple. And that particular rhyme, I've heard it in my tribe in Western Europe, I've heard it in Russia, I've heard it in what used to be Yugoslavia. It seems to be universal. We do have a very strong belief that some psychological problems are caused by what we call jungeleduka, bad spirits. And I personally have had experience of people who have had what seem to be psychological problems, but they don't fit the standard sort of textbook types of psychological problems, and they don't respond to anything psychiatrists can do. And many times people have been brought to me with this kind of thing, that this person seems to be psychologically unwell, but the psychologists and psychiatrists are stuck. Can you help? And every time when I've looked at them, they've got something on them that you can actually see as a shadow in their aura, that there's some kind of, what our Muslim friends call jinn, that's grabbed onto them, sucking their spiritual energy and making them sick. These things can be quite powerful and they can be very hard to shift. So I quite often get called in to shift these things. I actually get people consulting me from all over Europe about that kind of problem, and touch wood, I so far have a 100% success rate with them. I come on now to prognostic magic, fortune telling, which of course is part of the popular stereotype of what we do. And it is true. I mean, a lot of our women particularly are very gifted with prognostic magic. We believe, and this is a Hindu belief incidentally, that a lot of parts of life are, if not completely predestined, they run along what we call doriya, which it literally means ribbons. So it's like a ribbon of events or probability. And different people's doriya can branch or cross or tangle with other people's doriya. So you may have several possible doriya that your life can follow, but to someone who has the sight, they're knowable. And so you can say, this is what's likely to happen. It might go this way, but it's more likely to go that way. And that's the basis of our fortune telling. The word for fortune telling in Romani is dukeripen, which is comes from the phrase doriya kera, which means I do the ribbons, the doriya. So we are reading the ribbons of future probability to predict how people's lives will go. We have a number of different ways of doing it. The most popular one is of course tarot cards, and it's just a rather nice old picture, again I'll pass it round, of somebody doing card reading. A couple of interesting observations about that picture. You'll see that the woman who's actually doing the reading looks an awful lot like me. She's Roma. The other interesting thing you'll notice is that it's a 13-card spread with 1 card in the middle and 12 around the outside, and that is the traditional Romani way of doing it. And if anyone asks me to do a tarot reading, that's what I'll do. Tarot cards are actually of Roma origin originally, they're not European. The very earliest ones were something that our people handmade. They were pictorial because we were illiterate. We don't know exactly what the images would have been on the earliest ones. They would have been based on Indian beliefs, of course. But unfortunately, quite a lot is lost in history. They gradually settled down after Europeans got hold of them into the tarot that we know today. But as I say, the earliest tarot were hand-drawn by Romani witches. Interestingly, when tarot did pass into European culture, it was just a game for about 300 years before the Europeans caught on to using it for anything magical, whereas for us it was always magical. The other thing you'll often hear or see in books about tarot is that it's alleged to have mysterious Egyptian origins. And of course, because they thought we were Egyptians, there's the link. It is actually ours. Another thing that we're very big on, of course, is chiromancy, palm reading. And again, this is another rather nice picture that I have in my collection. And again, you'll see a woman who bears a remarkable resemblance to a younger version of me, to the point that people actually asked me if I posed for the picture, which I didn't because it was painted 100 years before I was born. You'll see somebody who looks very stereotypically Roma, palm reading for a couple of very wealthy white people. So that's very traditional for us, of course. We also have the crystal balls, of course. I have my 3 with me. That's used for scrying. There are other ways of scrying also. For example, using black ink and water or a black mirror. All of those work. And of course, many of the Roma witches also practice astrology, which can be very powerful if you know what you're doing. Come now to, sorry about my time management, it has gone on a bit long, but come now to the dark side of Romani magic. We do have a reputation, I'm very well aware of this, for cursing people, messing people up with magic, the gypsy's curse. Everybody's read a story about that, I'm sure. And it's true. We have no bar against using magic in a combative or punitive way, as long as it's proportional and justified. We believe in karma, of course, because we're a bunch of Indians. So we believe that if I would put a death curse on somebody just because they've insulted me, that would be completely unreasonable and my karma would be horrible. But so there is very much a dark side to our magic, but it's used very carefully. Normally it would be done to teach somebody a lesson, to push them onto a better line of behaviour, better dori in their own life. So for example, a few years ago I was asked to deal with a guy who was abusing his wife. And I put a palipin, a binding, on him, so that any time he lifted his hand to his wife, or was unjustifiably mean to her verbally, he would get a crushing pain in his chest that felt like a heart attack but wasn't, just to scare him. And I was told that within a month he'd reformed. I didn't do him any harm, I just threw a good scare into him to make him mend his behaviour. And that's the usual way that we would use, I wouldn't call it black magic, I would call it maybe grey magic, or magic to punitive or corrective magic, I think is the best way to say it. It's not, the point is not to mess people up, the point is to teach people a lesson and get them behaving properly. But we do use various types of bindings, particularly, very commonly, and that's a picture of a whole bunch of binding effigies from my collection. So I'll pass that on now. There's a number of ways we do it. The classic way is to make a little figurine, which in Romani is called kukli, out of either clay or wax or flour and water paste or mud or anything that comes to hand, really. And then you can bind it up with string, put wax on it, put pins in it, do a variety of invocations, which I'm not going to tell you, of course, because I'm forbidden to teach this. And it works. I will just digress very quickly about the rules, because we do have very strict rules for magic. Our magic is divided into what you could call 3 levels. This is particularly when it comes to teaching somebody else the magic. First level magic, which is magic that has no potential for harm. It can't harm the person trying to do it if they mess up, and it can't harm anybody else. So that's things like how to protect yourself magically, how to ground yourself so that you can relax. Very simple self-healing that can't go wrong. I'm allowed to teach that to absolutely anybody, because it can't do any harm even if they make a complete mess of it. Second level magic, which is things that can't really do harm, but you've got to kind of know what you're doing a little bit to do them. Things like basic healing, things like seeing auras. I can teach that to anybody I want to, but I do have a karmic responsibility for how they use it. So, for example, if somebody comes to me and says, "Oh, Natalia, will you teach me how to see auras?" Then I'll just have a quick look at them, and if they look like they're a reasonable person who intends good, I'll say, "Yeah, sure, I'll try and teach you and see if you can master it." If they look a bit dodgy, I might say no. But on the whole, level 2 magic is not harmful, even if you make a bit of a mess of it. So I'll teach that fairly freely. And then there's level 3 magic, which is super restricted. When you become Chandani, you have to give an oath on your immortal soul to follow the rules about secrecy of magic and how you use magic, whether you're using magic ethically. Level 3 magic, I'm not allowed to teach to anybody except my designated successor, who must be Roma. They must either speak Romani or learn it. Preferably, they should be a blood relative of mine, but they don't have to be. And I have total karmic responsibility for what they do with it. So, if I teach somebody how to bind and curse people, and they misuse it, I'm just as responsible as they are for that misuse. If I teach somebody how to do weather magic, we have a very strong tradition of weather control magic. I'm actually quite good at it. But that although you can't hurt somebody else with it, you can sure hurt yourself, because it uses very high levels of magical energy. And if you screw it up, you will hurt yourself, and that's why that's on the super restricted category. All of those categories, I'm perfectly allowed to do them for people and to demonstrate them, but I mustn't tell anybody other than my successor how to do them. So only my certain members of my close family get to know that stuff. And just finally, I'll talk a little bit about moon magic. The moon. I won't pass that around because everybody knows what the moon looks like. As I mentioned earlier in the talk, the moon is a god, not a goddess in our tradition. Same as in mainstream Hinduism. Many people, when they hear that, think that's weird. The moon's got a strong association in most cultures with the feminine, the menstrual cycle, all things female. So how can the moon be a god? Our answer to that is its polarity. Male attracts female. Male and female balance each other, work together, so therefore the thing that rules the female body would be male, and vice versa. I have to say at this point that our culture does have a fairly traditional view of gender roles. The moon is very significant in our magical traditions. Even though our ancestors lost the proper Hindu calendar, I don't know if any of you know about the Hindu calendar, they have a thing called the Vikrami calendar, which is lunisolar. And it's really quite complicated because it takes account of the cycles of the moon and also the length of the year. So you have to add in an extra month every few years to keep it all in balance. And unless you're a good mathematician and literate, you'll never have a hope in heck of calculating it. So our ancestors lost that. So we don't celebrate the the Hindu festivals on the proper days. We just kind of do our best. But still, the moon cycles are extremely important to us. The two most important times in the moon's cycle are the full moon and the new moon. The full moon is associated with power, openness, fullness, and the new moon is associated with endings and beginnings. So, for example, if you wanted to do a banishing magic, so I'll give you a concrete example. There's a very simple magical ritual that we use. If you want to banish something or reduce the influence of somebody who is giving you difficulty in your life, the classic way you do it is you take an egg and you write on the egg either the name of the person who is messing you up or whatever it is that you wish to reduce. So you might say, pain in my ankle, or next door neighbour's husband who's a dickhead, or whatever it might be, and then you bury that egg at a crossroads, because that's not a Christian thing. The crossroads actually invokes the trident of Lord Shiva. And you bury it during the waning part of the moon cycle, so that as the moon shrinks down from full or gibbous down through dark moon, it takes away the energy of whatever it is that you've invoked into your egg. That's another very simple piece of folk magic that anyone can do. It does work. The new moon is actually more important in our tradition than in mainstream Hinduism. So anytime you see, when you first see the new moon at the beginning of the cycle, you call out, "Dikavo nevokchon," which means I see the new moon. And then everybody has a big celebration and does their dark moon prayers. Usually we have a party. When a new Chandani magic worker is being initiated, that traditionally is done in 2 stages. So you start out at the dark moon. You start out by doing like a cleansing and preparation of the woman, so that she will say various invocations to purify herself, promise herself onto the path of Chandani Pin, and then she spends the next 2 weeks in prayer and preparation. And then when the moon becomes full, you have the actual initiation where she takes up the mantle of Brahmani magic. I think you'll find that kind of moon magic is found in a lot of traditions actually, and that's probably just because it works. I think I'm running out of time, so I think what I'm going to have to do, unfortunately, is more or less leave it there and hand over to questions. Sorry, my time management's been a little bit off, but I hope you found this interesting, and please do give me questions because I've probably missed things.
Okay, so I'll be managing the questions if that's okay. Now, some of you had, first things first, some of you had some teas and coffees and cakes and biscuits when you came in, some didn't, so if you didn't, that's also open to you. Who has got a question? Well, I'm going to call you Natalia.
That's fine. I'll do either Natalia or John. The reason, just very quickly, the reason that we have weird, complicated names is that we have European-style names to be easy for European people. So my European friends all call me Natalia or Natalie. I answer to both. My Indian friends call me Chandani.
So, does anyone have a question? Peter?
Very simply, taking into account all the traditions that come with the culture and the racial culture as well, how do you integrate that into a modern scientific thing? Or is there the great divide?
No, there isn't a great divide. And when I'm wearing my other hat, when I'm doing my money earning work, I'm a research scientist.
Oh, right.
I have a couple of science degrees and a PhD, but I'm still a Romani magic worker. I don't see any divide at all between them. Actually, a lot of scientists nowadays, particularly on the cutting edges of physics, where physics gets weird, are very happy with spiritual ideas. quantum physics is way beyond weird, and particularly the way that quantum physics is developing now is very compatible with spiritual beliefs, to the extent that if you go to CERN in Switzerland, you'll see there's a lovely big statue of Lord Shiva Natalia. That's the Lord of the Cosmic Dance incarnation or avatar of Shiva on the campus, because Shiva in Hindu tradition is the Lord of the Cosmic Dance, and quantum physics actually is a cosmic dance of sorts that's unpredictable, chaotic, very strange. You know, old school science from the days of Newton, everything is expected to be very regimented and mathematical. If we're dealing with big things, generally speaking, that's true. But when you're dealing with really tiny stuff, especially on a subatomic scale, it gets super weird. You can have particles in two places at once. You can have particles springing into and out of existence for no reason. You can have action at a distance where you do something to one particle and another particle a mile away suddenly flips state because they were paired or in quantum terms entangled. And a very popular current theory with quantum physics is that there is actually an information layer of the cosmos, even below the smallest material layer of the cosmos, that drives everything else. And the thinking is that if you can fiddle with that informational layer, you can literally reprogram reality. And so my argument would be that by doing magic, we're tweaking that informational layer of reality so that larger changes will follow from tiny changes in that microscopic information level.
I would go with that idea, the informational field, and that sort of fits with some of our understanding.
A lot of
auric field.
A lot of cutting-edge physicists are quite happy with the idea of having a spiritual world and magic, for want of a better term, on that basis.
And that has a lot of opportunity for healing, doesn't it?
Exactly.
At that level.
What I guess what I'm doing when I spoke in the talk about manipulating auras, what I'm doing is manipulate, and there are lots of structures in the human body, particularly in nerves and brain, that operate on the quantum level. And so I would argue that what I'm doing is subtly tweaking the deepest layer of reality in your body to stop pain or promote healing of a muscle or a nerve or whatever it is. Or sometimes you can actually do really quite dramatic healings. And one that, not wanting to blow my own trumpet too much, but one thing that actually I surprised myself by doing this because I didn't know if it was possible. But a very good friend of mine some years ago had a stroke, and she lost the use of the left side of her body, and she lost 95% of the ability to speak. And of course, when she came out of hospital, she was in a bit of a state mentally. So I went straight round to see her and to see whether I could do anything with my Chandani, my magic. And this actually happened in front of the NHS stroke team, who was still there looking after her. I first of all, I just looked at her, read her aura, and I said, oh, I can see where the stroke was. And I touched her on the head where it had been, and the stroke nurse sort of looked at me and said, have you seen her medical records? I said, no, I've literally just walked in the house, how would I see her medical records? But she said, you're exactly right, that's where the stroke was. So then I had to fiddle around, and I said, okay, can you lift your left hand? Left hand comes up. Ooh. And so I fiddled around like this for about an hour and a half. And by the end of it, she was using her left hand, standing up and walking and speaking. And the stroke nurse was like, what?
Very, very fascinating aspect of what you do. There was another hand went up at the back.
Oh, yes, I have a couple of questions, but anyone else?
Anyone else? Okay, there are a couple here. Did you want to go first?
I'll ask my first one. Then, do you know how many of you there were when you left India, or is that
not many? There's no historical record, and we did leave in several migrations spread over a time period of centuries. But we can work out from DNA studies that there were very few of us, because we suffer very badly from a thing called founder effect, where we're very prone to certain genetic conditions. And that's caused by having a very small founder population who then don't marry outside. We're very strict about marrying only other Roma, because otherwise, after 800, 900 years away from India, we wouldn't still look like I do if we married outsiders even one time in 10. And unfortunately, that also means we're a bit inbred. And that does mean we're much more prone to genetic difficulties than the general population.
Thank you for the question. Stephen?
Going back to you saying people have got attachments on them and you can see them,
Yeah.
Can you remove the attachment if you're not in the same room as them?
I would say not normally, because that's a very hands-on kind of magic.
Okay.
I've only ever done it hands-on, and that's actually one of the few magics where we actually make direct skin-to-skin contact as well, because you've got to get really sort of intimate, if you like, with somebody, and it feels to me doing the healing as though I'm burrowing down deep into the person's spirit. And I know from people who I've removed these things from, they've said it was a really weird experience. I have to get them to trust me completely, because otherwise, if they've got, depending how good their psychological barriers are, but I don't want to force my way in. I want them, that's not good. What I have to do is say, this is probably going to feel kind of weird, but trust me, I know what I'm doing. I promise I won't hurt you. And I then sort of burrow into their spirit at a very, very deep level to find the thing that's riding them and kick it out. And people I've done this to always say, that was the most weird experience of my life. I don't know what you did, but it felt weird.
Thank you, Stephen. The lady at the back.
I was just wondering, you mentioned that about 95% of the Roman population now is settled. How much of that is due to persecution and the fact that all the stopping places have been taken away, and how much of it is, as you described it, as sort of changing lives?
It's complicated. Some groups have been settled for centuries. I mean, in the Ottoman Empire, for example, we were encouraged to settle, to set up businesses. A lot of Roma in what was the Ottoman Empire were skilled blacksmiths, made weapons for the Ottoman army, those sort of things, and became quite respected members of society. In other parts of Europe, we were more persecuted and pushed from place to place, which of course kept us nomadic. But then, in the 20th century, two things happened that really changed the Roma-scape, if you like. One was the Nazis. They killed 75% of our entire population in Europe, including my grandfather and other relatives. And that really changed the demographics of Roma. And the other thing was communism. After the end of Nazism, of course, the majority of Central and Eastern Europe became communist. And we had a very strange relationship with communism. Some of the older Roma, say my age, who remember communism, remember it fondly. And actually sometimes even say, I wish we could go back to communism. Because even though the communists forbade us to travel, confiscated our caravans and forced us to settle, they also generally came down very hard on racism, made sure that we got education, made sure that we got jobs, made sure that we got healthcare. But the price for that was we couldn't travel and we weren't free to go off to Western Europe where we had family. So it's very much a two-sided thing. Because, of course, when communism ended and Eastern Europe opened up, and I've got family in Slovakia and Hungary and Romania, so we know about this. It was seen as, oh, this is a good opportunity. Hopefully things will get better, but actually they didn't, because things went back to being very, very racist. For example, if you go to Hungary and you look in any Hungarian newspaper for flats to rent, you'll see every single one, without exception, it will say Cigányok nem, which is Hungarian for no Roma, no gypsies. It's completely illegal, of course, under European law. It's complete discrimination. It's illegal, but everybody does it, and the government won't do a thing. And so, in many parts of Central and Eastern Europe, the Roma are literally not allowed to live in the white parts of town, are forced into horrible ghettos that often don't have water, don't have sanitation, treated very, very badly. And given that, I completely understand why some of our people wish for a return to communism. It's very much a two-edged sword.
Okay, so I'm afraid it's 2 minutes to 9, which is our time to close. So I am going to ask you to say thank you, because I think as Torbay Faith and Belief Forum has been blessed to have a knowledgeable speaker, a very rare gift to us because there are so few Roma speakers, and this has just been a fascinating evening, a little insight into the cultural heritage and beliefs and the work and healing mechanisms of Natalia's cultural group. Is that a good way of describing it? Her peoples and various other peoples that connect. I will say our next meeting is Friday, June the 23rd, again 7:30, a talk on the spiritual path, opening to the inner life by Leonard Hitchcock, a Subud practitioner. So that's something to look forward to. Can we say a big thank you to Natalia?